that our customers are demanding of us. So I think hardware still has ways to go. Then on the software side are some of the things we talked about. The fact that, for instance, the biggest IDE out there, the integrated development environment out there, doesn't support some of the formats that people in the industry use, whether it's STEP or JT. So we have to resolve those challenges so that it becomes something that everyone can pick up and start doing what they do instead of having to spend their time getting a file format to be understood by this particular engine. So those are just a few of the things that we deal with. Then it goes with the cost. Just to give you an example, people say, well, hardware like HoloLens costs a lot. But you got to realize, for virtual reality, you actually need a much better computer than you do for augmented reality. So it's amazing. Siemens, I mentioned to you, my division has 12,000 people. We could not find a developer computer, that had the requirements that we needed for HTC Vive.
Wow.
We have to go and buy a new one because it needs at least NVIDIA GTX 970 graphics card. So the GPU has to be special, high-end CPU. It has to have, at least really for development, 16 gigs of RAM. Which developer has a computer with 16 gigs of RAM? Yes, servers do, but developers typically don't. Then it has to have a special video port, video output, and so forth and so on. So you have to go and buy a VR-enabled PC to be able to do VR use cases. So you have all of these issues that we are trying to get around, and I think those are limiting us, but hopefully pretty soon they're all going to be resolved.
We have a lot of very smart people in this room. Nathan, what do you see as some of the technical challenges?
I think, as a company, we're end users. We're not really developers of this technology. We're really the end users. And so what we rely on developers and startups and smart people in that space. VR and AR are not our sweet spot. They're not our business. So having that developed for us. And one of the things that as we started, looking into more immersive visualization technologies, one of the things that we found is there wasn't a lot developed. You really have got to go develop it yourself. So we'd like to use just like I use a CAD tool today, or like I use an office suite. I plug it in, install it. My designers, my engineers, they just start using it. I don't want to have to spend a year developing it and say, well, you got to hold your head this way, and we have to reboot that every time. They don't want to do that. They want to be reliable. They just want to get in and drive it every day. And I think that's what we use to get this technology to that point, so people can just get in and drive it.
I saw some stuff in Boston last week at a conference with
Euphoria. For the first time I saw something really move. People were able to build. I actually built myself just by building a CAD model and transferred it to before I built a virtual reality app within just like literally 3 minutes. So those are the kind of tool sets that engineers need, because they don't want to program it up. I mean, could they? Yeah, they could, but they don't want to do it. They have other jobs to do, things that are more important to the company, more of our bottom line.
Great, thanks. Matt?
Yeah, I've got a long list of ideas that if you come up to me tonight, I would like you to check tomorrow to fun. You were touching on some of them. There's a whole bunch of hardware enablers from the optics, the obviously battery, the computer vision systems. A big one is input. No one solved it. No one really even knows how to solve it yet, what the solution will be. There's lots of great ideas, but no one's tied it all together. Industrial design, what the form factor is going to look like, how do you avoid the glass hole effect if you're going to wear it outside. Network infrastructure, we're going to, all these devices are pretty much single user right now, and we personally believe that they're mostly used as entertainment devices or marketed as entertainment devices, but it's when they become communication devices, when we can share our experience here in this space with someone in another space, is going to be incredibly powerful, and the communication industry is orders of magnitude bigger than entertainment. And that can be helping fix a product, or it can be I'm traveling and I want to feel like I'm with my kids. And just in that, there's a whole bunch of different applications. There's network infrastructure, there's going to be routers and networks and things that need to be designed. If you're an interaction designer and you've got ideas as to how physical people and things should actually work with virtual things. You'd fund that sort of stuff. To start, audio still isn't really solved that well. Yeah, we haven't even touched the application layer yet. There's just so many problems still to be solved that I would love to back.
So ripe with opportunities. That's Matt, I think like where.
I hugely agree, amen, especially to some of the stuff that Matt highlighted. Infrastructure, may not be the sexiest area, but the scary secret of both of these industries, both AR and VR, is that all of these problems are going to get many orders of magnitude worse before they get better. So when you look at holographic data density and some of the display technology that's coming in subsequent generations of these devices, you're going to see somewhere between a 10,000-fold and a million-fold jump in data density. And a lot of these conversion problems have not been solved. And there's one model which is he'll give you ideas, and then you can go build companies around it. Same thing, I'll give you ideas, and then we'll acquire you as soon as you've solved those problems. Like there are lists and lists of those kind of things. A lot of conversion stuff, a lot of hardware optimization. I give appendages to see many more companies like Movidius tackling kind of the application-specific domains as well, because there's just so much to be done.
Great, thanks. So hopefully people in the audience are taking notes and we can come back with some solutions to these problems. Now, everything we've talked about thus far, we've really lumped AR and VR together, but there are some subtle differences. When it comes to implementing the use cases for AR versus VR, there are differences. I think some of you most of them. What people to be aware of?
Well, I think I mentioned various aspects. First of all, you need different development hardware to be able to do VR versus AR. But there's also the user experience that you're needing to create, because again, fundamentally they're different in the way the user feels about the environment they're in. As I mentioned during the talk, in one case, you're actually doing your best to separate the user from their real environment, whereas in the other case, you want them to be fully aware of where they're at. So there's the user experience aspect that's different. It's the hardware that you need to do development that's different, and of course the device that you use at the end is going to be different. And I think, to me, we eventually are going to get to this mixed reality world where we will be able to kind of take advantage of both of these and take care of some of the motion sickness issues that people have by giving them a reference frame and so forth and so on. I think those are with augmented reality, for instance, you have a lot less issues with motion sickness because people have a fixed point of reference. The room is available to them. With virtual reality, I think Nathan was telling me that they have astronauts that have been in G-forces and yet they put this thing on, and after a few seconds they have motion sickness. And that to me is it's kind of amazing that people can get that. And I think if we don't solve those issues, then people are not willing to play with in those worlds.
Well, I think one of the things that I didn't really understand and think about was the content preparation, the user experience. We can kind of prepare that much different between AR and VR as we prepare. I work with some of our industrial training people to put together some of the demos and things that we did, and like we wrote completely different storyboards for each one. And I just thought we kind of do both. And a bit naive on my part, but we learned it is quite different in the experience of what they do. So again, from an end user perspective, you're trying to prepare what the user experience will be a lot different. You need people scripting it, writing storyboards, doing things, how they interact, what's the information you'll display back, what do they need to know, what are they trying to teach them, what are you trying to have them understand from it. So that's quite different. Back on the point, that I think it's one of the biggest challenges with VR that we experienced was this. I would say probably about 20% of the people that we put through our lab experienced some form of motion sickness. I worked in it for, even a couple of months, and then all of a sudden one day, I don't know what happened that one day, but it hit me and I got sick, and I had to go home. And I was kind of poo-pooing everybody else, you're just And then, like I said, we have our astronaut who had done this before, and he goes, I'm a little queasy, he said, when he finished up one day. So, I think those challenges are challenges that have to be solved. They're different. I haven't had that same experience with AR. it seems to be you're more aware of just the motion sickness doesn't seem to be an issue with AR from what we've seen.
Matt, anything you'd like to add from a different standpoint?
Not too much. From the shameless pitch for AR standpoint, I wish that people would use the physical world more. I think when you look at a lot of the motion sickness issues, look at a lot of the change management issues with getting people familiar with this and into the device and comfortable and kind of setting the scene, there's a lot that our existing hardware, our physical anatomy does for us in those categories. And so things like, playing with people's expectations and cultivating attention to things that defy physics, for example, in AR, is a good way to sort of, thin slice those opportunities. But, the more that we get to kind of an interchangeable landscape from a content standpoint, so we avoid that fragmentation issue, the more people will be able to play with that. But my guess would be less content, less, stuff in the field of view, and more of the real world for a lot of different reasons.
Great. Well, we've been talking a lot, so this is the point where I do want to throw the microphone to the audience. So any questions for our panelists, feel free to direct them at either a single member or the entire panel. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So, you've been drawing a lot of parallels between, the smartphone evolution and the VR, AR, right? I think I see one difference. I mean, smartphones at least, it got popularity in the consumer space first, and it got economies of scale there first, and then it went into enterprise and industrial, right? But in VR, I mean, we don't even have the 1.0 version on consumer yet, but it seems like we're trying everything at the same time. So are we sort of putting the cart in front of the horse here? So that's one question. I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I don't think we've achieved the overall sort of quality of experience across the board. And when you look at sort of the tipping factor on the consumer side, it's that everything is easy, everything is pleasant, everything is cheap. And until all those things are true, you won't see that volume of numbers. But I would highlight that, you save one worker's error that costs you $1 million, and it can justify a heck of a lot of development energy that goes into that. So I think there are meaningful differences between the smartphone and AR.
I disagree that smartphones are consumers first. The first mobile phones were these big bricks that were car phones for doctors and lawyers and stockbrokers who could afford them. The first smartphones were like the Nokia communicator that flipped open. Blackberries, they were all used by professionals first who could afford them and could afford the data plan. And it wasn't until well after the iPhone came out that they were a really popular consumer product. There's a lot of cheerleading around VR right now. People say the Oculus, it's the iPhone VR, and I think it's barely the Nokia communicator of VR. It's kind of the first product that kind of works, and it's all kind of there, but it doesn't do that great a job. And it's, we're going to have to see our BlackBerry and sometimes do it before the iPhone comes out. So yeah, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of parallels that are kind of stretched a bit thin, I think. But I do think it will eventually, the trend of history will be quite similar for eyewear and smartphones.
Yeah, I just want to add, I agree with you, as I mentioned before. The difference that I see is none of our customers could see a role for smartphone in their industry, right? And people were using it, but to say I'm going to use a smartphone on the shop floor, they weren't talking about that. But they're talking about using AR and VR devices on the shop floor now. And they're, as I mentioned before, they're coming to us with their use cases. They know what they want to do, they just can't build it because they're not able to do it. They're asking us to do it for them. So I think there is that difference, but I think there are also a lot of similarities with what that evolution went.
Great. Any other questions?
Thank you. So you touched very briefly on content, on the issue of content, and I'd love to hear more from the panel about in the industrial sphere, where is this content coming from? Is it how is this content managed? How is it going to be handled in a scalable way? Can you comment on that?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a tough problem. It's one of the list of my things I love to fund. A lot of content that exists today is 2D. It's images, it's words, text, and there is 3D content, CAD models and stuff. But there's no easy way for a regular person to capture and create 3D content, and that's a unsolved problem, massive opportunity for someone to solve. Phones will come soon with depth cameras that will get a bit easier to scan things, but I don't think there is a really good solution today, and I think it's kind of up to the application designers to be creative.
I think the chief problem is not conversion, it's a lack of an endpoint. So if we knew what we were converting to, if we had the perfect optimized format for AR, for example, all the I/O challenges were figured out, and you knew how to manipulate it, and you knew what the task sets were, I think the conversion gap would get closed very, very quickly, because a lot of people tend to work in that space because they want to take their existing libraries of content and make them useful. I actually think it's solving the low-hanging fruit stuff on UX and on I/O. And if we solve those two things, we'll have a much better standard to convert to, and then I think you'll see an avalanche of content.
We have a plethora of 3D models already built of all of our products. They're sitting in the PLM system. They're all CAD models. They're all 3D. How do we get them out? How do we get them into VR? That was a bit of a challenge, even for the models that we built. We built a building, put a propellant mixer in it. We put mixing the very complicated machinery in it. But it was a challenge to get it into Unity. It wasn't too hard. I mean, it took a few days, but there were formats to get it through. But it wasn't just a simple thing. It's like, we'll just do that. I think that's where JT and other contents. I mean, how do you get all that library? I mean, every company out there today that has product has 3D CAD data. No one's building 2D drawings anymore. They're doing 3D CAD models. So that's a huge content library.
You don't experiment when it takes 3 days to convert a model.
Right. and so how do you get that? How do you get to it fast and get it into VR, get it to AR? I think to be able to tap that is extremely important.
I think I want to add to it. I think that's a great question. The difference that I see is the issue is not just the 3D model. It gets old. I mean, I've had HoloLens for a while, and great, you see the 3D model. But then you ask questions about, okay, what are the work instructions? How about the product manufacturing information? What about the GD&T, which is geometric dimensioning and tolerance? What about additional information about how this was built? What is the material properties of what I'm looking at? What material is it? So I think the amount of information that you need in these worlds goes well beyond just 3D models. I actually think getting the 3D model on there is not as difficult as the fact people's expectations, because they want to see a lot more. They want to see a lot more information about that, and they're going to ask for it, and we have to kind of connect the dots to be able to display 2D, 3D, GD&T, be able to display it so that as the user is walking around the park, things are facing them that they're interested in, they're not hidden. And I think it's going to be frustration if they don't get access to not only having all that data available to them, but also visible and viewable in the world that they exist, because they don't want to have to take this thing off of their head, look at that, and then put it back on to see the rest of it. I think they want that continuous environment to do their work. And as I said, if you're on the shop floor, you need all that information available to you. And I think that's what they're going to be asking.
Great. Any other questions? One in the back.
Yes. My question is about the business landscape and what is the role of system integrators in bringing technologies to end users and applications? Is there an ecosystem that has room for smaller companies like Siemens, much smaller, to act as integrators or distributors in order to bring technologies into end use applications where there's customization involved and either
integrators to find a niche and actually productize some of the consulting that you might currently view as a consulting opportunity. All those kind of network of apps and solutions and integration, they aren't really there yet. It's kind of just a greenfield. So if you've got customers and they've got some opportunities that you think might be a good fit for a VR AR solution, no one's probably doing it, and you've got a chance to maybe build that quite simple app and turn it into a product and sell it as a product and actually end up being in a possibly better place than time materials as a systems integrator.
One area we're seeing really take off is where a systems integrator, small or large, has existing domain expertise, and they might not know AR very well, but they realize what they're bringing to the table with that domain expertise, and they're willing to sort of get down in the trenches quickly with the folks who are solving the technology problems to look at how do those match up. Where are the easy wins among that? And absolutely, we're seeing dozens of brand new, very small players be successful, as well as incumbents pick up a new skill set or acquire a skill set.
I think we partner with a number of small companies to help us, smaller consulting and also with providers, like training providers. We actually had one work with one. All my programmers, none of them had ever done any gaming programs. Surprise. And so we're like, well, yeah, we already know you do, so we're not, we can learn it, but yeah. And so, I think there are opportunities out there in a variety of ways for industrial companies like our own. For consultants and others to help out and kind of bridge the gap, especially right now.
We've got a couple more minutes, so question in the background.
Hey, Andrew from Apex. So I have a question. This is especially geared for Daiquiri, but up until this point, we've seen a lot of uptake by enterprise customers in assisted reality devices. So we're talking Google Glass, the Music 100, like Mike mentioned, Intel's Project. So looking forward at augmented and virtual reality devices, do you see these devices replacing the assisted reality devices, or do you see them more sort of working alongside them due to price point or difference in vertical use cases?
I'd say from the Decker perspective, it depends a lot on that timeline. So a year from now, I think you still see a really fragmented device landscape. I think you've got application-specific stuff, like Google Glass with a very light form factor, very light on horsepower and battery life as well. But you look at what just a couple of years of development does, to all of those. But you'll still see sort of premium and even niche devices, which are just starting to sort of emerge right now. If you look at DoD or government-funded work, there's a lot of niche devices that nobody's ever heard of, but that have a very specific, robust set of capabilities for that narrow use case. I think you look 5 years out, that fragmentation goes away. You start to see some of these display technologies become more ubiquitous, and you see OEMs emerge. And then if you go 10 years out, I actually think you just get a vaccine of nanobots, and it goes directly into your visual cortex.
Well, earlier you mentioned that this was going to be sort of fragmented for a while, right? Like you're going to have a lot of layers of all the different verticals and horizontals. So you see that actually going away in like 10 years or so. You think there's going to be like Google Nanobot or the Daiquiri Nanobot, and everybody just sort of checks itself?
I actually think more goes away than that. I think the entire enterprise gets distributed. I think once you have anybody able to do the thing that's both just within their reach and just beyond their reach, people's portability in different projects and different companies really takes another step change up compared to what we're already seeing. And then almost everybody's just independent with the hardware necessary to do the types of tasks they want to undertake.
Thanks for a great question. Go ahead.
Yes, my concern is this is very exponential technology, both AR and VR, but I worry about in the VOTEX and the colleges that it's lacking in the supply chain. Like they're still just doing 2D. How are we going to bring that whole workforce up to spec?
Yes, I'm sorry, just to summarize the question. So the question was, what are we going to do as we think about the workforce required to operate in this technology, currently being trained in the art of 2D, is the way you put it. How are we going to bring that workforce along?
Management 2D is going to go away. It's just in our office about this. I mean, if you look at the real world, we're 3D people in a 3D world. We still write on paper. Sculpture hasn't replaced paper. So I think there's always going to be a mix. I think that eventually the UX and the GUI of these eyewear products is going to be natural enough that you're not going to need to be a 3D expert in order to get your job done if your job involves writing things down and sending them to other people. It just might be a more natural type of communication.
I think the education model has to flip to meet the pace of change. And you're seeing some of that, they're pulling in some of the expertise from industry. But I think where, 10 years ago it was easy to say academia is X, number of months or years ahead of industry, that whole paradigm is just a jumble right now in terms of who's ahead and what category.
So one of the programs just comes to mind. I have an extern, for example, this summer. So it's a high school teacher who's coming in and work with my statistician in my group who's going to do some mathematics, do some of the mathematics, again, to try and give her some exposure so that she can take it back to the school. I mean, there's one way maybe. We do a lot of interns at, every summer we have a program of interns. That's a great way to bring them in. Externs, if you've seen the intern, the movie, it's a little bit like that, I guess. It's kind of bringing someone in at the high school level, a high school teacher, come in and kind of experience what's happening in the industry. How does that become relevant with what they're teaching? And again, starting a little lower level at high school grade level. So I think there's opportunities out there to do that kind of thing. I think it's up to companies to reach out and do that. I mean, we have some state funding to do that. So the state actually funds high school teachers. It pays their salary while they come and work for us.
Oh, wow.
And so it's not, we don't get much. I would say we're going to get this giant valuable content out of somebody there who's working for free for the summer, but it's an exchange program where we hopefully we pick some things up, we infuse some things back into the community, back at the high school level, and that pays back to us as we eventually get graduates back out of college.
Right, I know we're at the top of the hour, so did you want to add anything more?
Well, just to say anything along the same lines, it's about productivity, improvement, and convenience. When people had to go back again, walk to the shop floor, if they wanted to see something, they had to go back to their workstation to see the numbers and then come back and they said, well, this is not working, so give us something that we could use right at the point of, say, inspection. So they started carrying these tablets with them. And it's the same thing now with these devices that they can wear and they can leave their hands free, the work instructions will be in front of them. And I think once the convenience comes into the picture, people tend to really go towards it. And that the issue of training is not as important to them. We actually get people that used to look at paper to work with computers that had never worked with computers. This is several years ago. And we thought it's going to be really difficult to do it. But they could see that it's going to help them. They have to carry these massive things that they were actually getting in trouble because this version of the paper was different than that other version of paper that the other mechanic was using. So they said, oh, this is good because we have the same copy of all these machines, so we avoid trouble for doing something different than that and always getting in trouble. And I think this is what caused them to say, yes, we want to go ahead and learn how to work with this monitor or this tablet. I think the same thing would happen in this case, so I'm not worried that people are going to have trouble. I think the convenience and the ease of use.
Very well, unfortunately we are out of time. I do want to thank our panelists. We only represented 2 letters of the alphabet in our first names, but we've got a lot of diversity of opinion and many perspectives across the AR and VR world. So